Well, here we are, the 34th Annual Service to Agricultural Award winner. This young man has always been a life and a dream of working in agriculture. Being a veterinarian just added to that passion that he had in the industry. A farm kid from Schuyler, Nebraska, who graduated from Schuyler High School, found himself at UNL in pre-vet. In the end, he ended up at the University of Missouri College of Veterinary Medicine. Now, his list of achievements and his dedication to the agricultural industry are quite long. Included in that is the director of the Panhandle Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. Also, being in veterinarian extension, he has spent 28 plus years in the Scottsbluff area and now calls the Harvard area his home. Now that he's technically retired, but still servicing as a veterinarian, he says he's very involved in organizational activities such as church. Very fortunate, he said, to continue to be involved in livestock industry groups on both the state and national level. Ladies and gentlemen, will you help me welcome to the podium our 34th Service to Agriculture winner, Dr. Dale Grotelueschen.
Right there in the middle, Dale. I want to congratulate you. You want to read that, Susan?
It says, KRVN Service to Agriculture Award, Dr. Dale Grotelueschen, for significant contributions to rural Nebraskans, June 15th, 2021, the Nebraska Rural Radio Association.
Congratulations.
I guess always beware when a speaker brings a glass of water to the front. So, and I guess now I'm starting to wonder when we have a past honoree describes his outcomes after he got this award. Now I'm kind of on the lurch maybe here, but at any rate, thank you very much, Susan, for the introduction. I just wish to really express my sincerest gratitude to the Nebraska Rural Radio Association for this wonderful honor. I never dreamed a farm kid who grew up in Schuyler would ever be standing in front of you today. I was just, back in the 1970s, it was just starting to carve out a niche for my wife and family. That was the big obstacle in front of me for quite a while. I'd like to comment the contributions of this organization to agriculture, the agriculture fabric in Nebraska are monumental. Consequently, the status of this organization enjoys throughout the state is really exemplary. Thank you to all who make up and are associated with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Susan mentioned my association to the Great Plains Veterinary Educational Center. Many past contributions are not always evident day to day, and maybe they aren't meant to be, but I observed that there's a plaque at the UNL Great Plains Veterinary Educational Center, located at Clay Center. It's not always seen by a lot of public, mostly students, but there are public that come through there. But it's at the entry to the room that's called the reference room, which is the library. It's a conference room. It's a classroom. It's one of the most used rooms in the building. And it's from about 1989 and maybe plus or minus a year or so. But the inscription says, the Nebraska Rural Radio Association Incorporated, owner of KRVN Lexington and KNEB Scottsbluff, proudly dedicates this reference room to one of its founders and first general manager, Max Brown, as well as to those rural Nebraskans who had the initiative and foresight to form this unique organization. So support provided by the organization to this organization to agriculture over 30 years ago is still ongoing. That's nice. There are likely people here who were involved with that dedication to that room. I'd like to recognize publicly and thank my wife, Elizabeth. She prefers Lisa. I think her mother calls her Elizabeth, so I'm doing well there, for all she does to make things go better at our place. For over 51 years, for her doing so much for our partnership. Her solid support, wisdom, and insight has been the difference for me so many times over the years. You know, all in addition to being the mother of our 2 grown daughters, and also as a high school educator, math and physics for over 30 years. Also, I'd like to thank our daughters, Chris and Sarah, who are grown, for really giving me further reason to pursue my passions. Thank you also to the farmers and ranchers, feedlot people, personnel, veterinarians, and people in production ag, from whom I've learned so much. It is wonderful to have these associations and friendships. I just hope you have gained as much in return. Also, thank you to those I worked with for these years that I worked with. There are some whose association has been absolutely pivotal for my work and the direction my career headed. We didn't use the word in early days, mentorship, but I relied on many mentors over the years, and to them I owed a huge amount of gratitude. I'm so blessed that this network of people I've relied on for their knowledge and expertise and advice in addressing cases on ranches and feedlots around Nebraska over the years. I'm going to refrain from naming names. I would unintentionally leave some out. When I returned to Nebraska in 1976 to practice veterinary medicine in Curtis, or the Curtis area, in southwest Nebraska, KRVN was a stable companion during the time in my practice truck, days and lots of nights. I think I've got listening time for 24 hours out of the day somewhere in there. Recently, it's given me pause to remember the wonderful people who make up this entire field of agriculture and the privilege it's been to work with them over all these years. Also, the number of friendships, including working relationships, it's given rise to, like many people in ag, it's a true blessing and really a pleasure to work in agriculture. It was first an aspiration of mine, and then an honor to work toward the success of ranch and farm families, of individuals, as well as agriculture as an industry. Something I guess I've worked for since early days. I've been so fortunate to have lived it as a veterinarian, but as it turns out, almost all of it is really in the beef industry. And our kids grew up, they occasionally stopped to evaluate whether their dad was really worth his salt. I'm sure you kids have done that once in a while in probably various ways. And so their conclusion was, yep, Dad, you're definitely in the right line of work. I can't remember who was reporting at an NCBA convention several years ago. And it was a KRVN reporter, and I can't remember who it was, but when we finished it up, whoever it was asked if I would mind helping out with a Dewey Nelson spoof interview. And so, I said, okay, and I laid it on pretty thick. But I never heard whether Dewey got that raise he was after, and I sure never got a cut out of any of that. So, but actually during our Scotts Bluff days, our families were attended church together and we actually did some babysitting together. And I'm not sure who babysat who anymore. And we were neighbors just a couple blocks away. So it's probably better I don't remember who babysat who. Over the years, I've had the pleasure of working with so many incredibly special and talented people. There's so much ability and brain trust that spans agriculture, and it's just awesome. There's so much to be learned from members across all parts. There have been plenty of meetings that I've attended, and I'm probably somewhere between a privilege and in a sentence sometimes, but some productive and some otherwise. A pet peeve of mine is what I've come to allude to as aspirational meetings. And that's a meeting where a group of people get together in a room and they talk about what they're going to do to somebody else. And so I'll let you imagine about where some of those might have happened. And I'm glad to get that out of my system. But anyway, working with people in agriculture is a tremendous pleasure. I intentionally chose to work really at production levels of agriculture. There's so many areas to work in, but the production levels is where my sweet spot has been. Working for the success of individuals in production agriculture is just a highest priority. And meet people where they're at. That's kind of a cliche. And another way to say it similarly, we might couch it that systems in agriculture are extraordinarily complex, and understanding them is critical, even if not always successful. Understanding the individualized systems of the individuals in their operations is as important as gaining understandings of systems across the industry. Having a little more time to reflect, a good part of my years in agriculture have focused on problem solving. I have a friend who says that's what veterinarians do, solve problems. Well, for me, that includes years in clinical practice, mostly at Curtis, years in the UNL Panhandle Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory at Scotts Bluff, and then at the Great Plains Veterinary Educational Center at Clay Center, in addition to some years in the pharmaceutical industry. But these have always been, these problem solving has always been production and health problems of the individual production systems, as well as issues common to the industry. The diagnostic laboratory in particular was a great venue from which to learn about production issues, especially that were problems in the Nebraska beef industry, for individual operations as well as the industry as a whole. We had daily interactions in the laboratory, and sometimes more than daily, with producers and veterinarians that helped us to better understand. In the diagnostic lab, we reported laboratory results first by telephone and then by fax. Remember, this was back about 1985 to 2001, and I can remember our first fax machine, some of you probably as well, that had roller paper, and it was like, and looking at it, how can it do that? But back in those years, and then we'd follow them by a written report that would go out to the owner in the veterinary clinic, and we saw, lots and lots of owners' names. I had the opportunity to meet these people who went out in meetings and so forth and out at their ranches, but connecting names with all those letters was somewhat a challenge, but we addressed some of it over the years. I'd like to address most of the remainder of my remarks to a different topic, and here. So stewardship has become a prominent word, has become prominent across agriculture today, but maybe it's not always received its fair due. It's also, I'd say, this stewardship attitude, stewardship culture has increasingly shaped my life, how I think and what I do. It's consistent with my view of the world as well as my value system. We often search for the why in things we engage in. That often becomes stewardship. Essentially, all in agriculture, including related occupations, engage in aspects of stewardship and stewarding our resources. But maybe sometimes reminders and reinforcements are kind of good for us. Stewardship can be defined as careful and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care, according to Webster. In the world of agriculture, there's plenty of room for the meaning of this word, as there is in life. We have been entrusted with a lot. It keeps us on track for continuous improvement. Production agriculture, including the beef industry, has a remarkable record of increasing efficiencies over time, now producing more pounds of beef per year with fewer cows than there were decades ago, and we're not done with that yet. I confess that I confided with a good friend and colleague a few years ago that somehow I was feeling like I'd become less of a veterinarian, at least in the traditional sense. And he observed that really that I had engaged in stewardship and that I'd really changed my way of thinking. Some information that's been out there for a few years. World population is projected to grow at about around 9 billion people sometime between 2040 and 2050, according to findings of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Global demand for food, feed, and fiber is expected to nearly double over the next 40 years due to the increasing population and increases in wealth, especially in developing countries. Improving standards of living increased demand for protein, including meat. If this scenario plays out and if demands are met, it would appear that the resources needed to produce food and fiber will become a higher or highest priority of society. There's limited land available for expanded food production in the world. Stewardship, bringing increased efficiencies and better uses of resources, will play a major role for us in agriculture. Yes, that includes technologies of various sorts that will come to the forefront. Meeting people where they're at. And it may not have the same meaning from one person to the next, but production systems are each at some level of being unique. So stewardship may look different depending on what the system might call for. Continuous improvement, some version of it is certainly a characteristic of stewarding an ag entity, regardless of where you are at. You might say stewardship is something we pull on with our boots every morning. Somewhat counter to this, we're dealing with pressures that do not always appear to be consistent with projected population growth and future food and fiber needs. In part, this seems to be rooted to basic change that has become prevalent during, really, I think, my lifetime, or at least coming to a head. Varying value systems and worldviews that prioritize resources differently are at increasing odds, often resulting in increased pressure on agriculture. These are root causes. There are root causes for these differences. But simply stated, maybe we can boil that down some. Then we felt there were unlimited resources, or in some cases perceived, or at least we acted like they were. Now, as population in the world, we live with recognized limited resources that's real, or in some cases perceived. Water, air, space, energy, the list goes on. These have all become shared resources, and others in society with greatly expanded concerns from our traditional, maybe more individualized and recognized limits like money, labor, size of operations. It seems like there's someone or somebody, some entity that wants a part of it, part of things that agriculture is considered that it's basically been ours. We've often assumed our priorities are the same as society's. Some would say that this coincides with the availability and supply of food, but this competition for resources is likely to increase, and it's likely our job in this arena will not be done anytime soon. We are increasingly engaged in protecting our resources and, yes, increasing stewardship of those that we have will become not only the thing to do, but vitally necessary. So I guess, so what are we doing what are we doing anyway, engaging in livestock production? Also, we could call it at times animal protein production. A little lesson from high school biology. We're using photosynthesis. There are reminders here. Photosynthesis, which is the formation of carbohydrates in living plants using carbon dioxide, and water by the action of sunlight on chlorophyll, So what's that main carbohydrate produced? Cellulose. And so what's important about that? It's the primary one, and also oxygen's a byproduct. Well, as it turns out, and no reminder to this group, nothing new to this group, but certainly ruminants or cattle are unique animals that have the ability to convert cellulose to usable form. You and I do a terrible job of things like that. So our humans and most animals can't do this. We're talking about unique ability to digest grasses and other forages, which Nebraska has a lot of. Nebraska's got millions of acres of grass, a resource well suited for this purpose. Ruminants are special animals. That's pretty cool. We are using photosynthetic energy, sunlight, renewable energy to convert plant food, primarily roughage, non-usable by people, by humans, to produce high quality, nutrient dense food. So the meaning of stewardship applies to entities throughout agriculture, people, environment, animals. People in agriculture are great thinkers, and teamwork makes them better. Getting teams together at the kitchen table to problem solve has been a most gratifying experience for me over the years. The accomplishments from these has been a big highlight. These have gone far beyond individual operations involved having addressed industry health and production issues. From a problem-solving perspective, there are commonalities across livestock operations that are important for problem-solving, even though they're highly individualized systems. We have attempted to address some of these problems with small team focus groups that produced tremendous results. Team approaches, small teams were key difference makers for some problem-solving. Easy to say, but took some doing to accomplish. Arranging small teams, often with varying but essential expertise, to meet, discuss, and problem solve when assembling at the ranch or feedlot brought together more knowledge and skill or horsepower in an efficient and direct way. These always included an owner-producer. We made progress in major cattle health areas, including baby calf diarrheas, nursing calf respiratory disease, and more recently, feedlot congestive heart failure. Work still in progress using team approaches. I think it was cool that often the rancher who was the one in the front of the room writing on the easel. These all efforts focused on prevention. We will touch on antibiotics a little later and tie in a little bit more on prevention as well. A little on environment. Nebraska grazing lands cover about 1/2 of the state. Nebraska land area is about 49.5 million acres, with about almost 45 million acres cared for by farms and ranches. The Nebraska Department of Ag states there are about 22 million acres in grassland. That includes pasture and rangeland. The Sand Hills covers about 19,000 square miles, about nearly 13 million acres, about half of the grazing land. Our current inventory of beef cows is about 1.9 million people, ranks 4th in the U.S. Combined with feedlot cattle, calves, and others, we have nearly 7 million head of cattle in the state, 1st in the U.S. Nebraska is a leader in producing food, animal protein, for we humans. Close to home, Loss of the grazing land resource is becoming a serious issue in increasing areas of the state. From an environmental perspective, cedar tree encroachment on Nebraska grazing lands may be the largest threat to immediate and long-term sustainability of many Nebraska grazing operations. Realities hit home for many over the last 20 years, with a good number of successes in the past and in progress. Landowners and others are pooling their resources and have formed organizations around the state. One example being the Lost Canyons Rangeland Alliance that are focused on prescribed fire. These are tremendous teamwork organizations. Public-private partnerships are working well. This insidious epidemic is a widespread occurrence across the state. Land ownership, including those having decision-making responsibilities, often in some level of transition and generational change. Reasons and timing to address this issue can be quite complex, but combating this issue can be daunting, and it's often easier to ignore and kick the can. However, owning it, including encouragement, teamwork, and joining with others, is really moving these critical efforts forwards. Agriculture, including the livestock industry, has made big gains in stewarding our environment, including grass resources, planned grazing, with systems approaches that are continuously improving our environmental resources. Maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but you know, I've given thought over the years if, you know, is animal health and productivity different, or is it the same? And if I back up and take a kind of a longer view, I'd have to say that they kind of blend together. With animal health and productivity are really deeply intertwined and really become one over time. Animal husbandry has become a more recognized aspect of animal production in recent years. Low stress cattle handling is routinely employed in cattle operations. It means removing risk factors that lead to reduced health and productivity. The Sandhills calving system is an example, addressing risk factors to reduce chances for baby calf diarrheas. Management focuses on animal needs and comfort to better optimize their ability to be productive and efficient. We have learned this can be more compatible for humans caring for the animals as well. Stewardship of antimicrobials or antibiotics, well, it's a topic that is discussed publicly at times. So, well, why might we need to even consider stewardship as something like antibiotics? The principal answer is that there is a concern about loss of their effectiveness in both human and animal medicine, that resistance might develop by the bacteria they're designed to combat, which would render them ineffective. This has been demonstrated on both human and animal cases. But the first step in antibiotic resistance is prevention of disease. Need for antibiotics suggests that there's already been a loss in the system, or loss is anticipated or highly likely. This might be oversimplified in some ways. However, prevention is a goal that is in a continuous improvement mode, and it moves us toward good prevention brings, good prevention brings, including, yes, less antibiotic use. It's fair to say my remarks today have come from a lens that has the livestock industry, especially beef cattle, deeply embedded in it. Embracing and attempting to understand systems, including the systems thinking discipline, has become somewhat of a passion over as my career has moved on. A system, thinking about systems a little bit more, a system is an interconnected set of elements or parts that is organized in a way that achieves something. The systems thinking discipline studies systems to better understand the world is circular, not linear. There are delayed and unintended consequences to actions or interventions imposed to solve problems or crises. Some of our problems are caused by past years' solutions. Systems in agriculture are highly complex. Seeking to understand them is better appears to be worthy of more effort. I can remember discussions about how to relate to what the cattle in fact does. Are we raising calves? Are we raising cattle? Are we raising pounds of beef? Is it raising beef? Is it raising food? So we could probably debate the merits of those and all have a good discussion. But there are various opinions expressed on each of these, and of course they're all correct within the realm of the system that's addressed. There are good reasons for production agriculture to focus on production and profitability aspects of systems. However, from a systems perspective, livestock production is increasingly participating in and tied to the human food system. We might ask, why shouldn't it be? After all, we're producing food. Future production systems will be strongly tied to the food system as consumers are increasingly disconnected from animal production and desire more information related to where their food comes from, including things like animal welfare, production conditions, environmental impacts, antibiotic use, and other wants. We're getting better as an industry in finding stronger presence at the table, and rightfully so. Stewardship of the food system, the human food system, what does that look like when we're mixed with our production-related systems? We're finding out, and we're making progress. I like a boilerplate statement that was coined by a good friend several years ago. He says, "Animal agriculture is feeding the world by caring for humans through responsible resource management and the prudent use of technology." This concludes my remarks. There's so much good happening in agriculture. It's been a privilege every day to serve the people in this wonderful field. And I hope there's been at least some food for thought here presented over the last short span of time. Again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Also, thanks to all I've had the pleasure of working with and learning from. It's a privilege and a pleasure to serve the people in agriculture. And thank you to the Nebraska Rural Radio Association for all that you do.
Take one drink.